Hey guys, Dodge here for Team Chaos MTG. It is Thursday, November 8th, 10 a.m., and I am super excited for Star City Games Regionals happening this weekend. The format is modern. I'll be playing Blue-White Control. Let's go over the deck. First up, no control deck is really doing what it wants to without drawing a bunch of cards and exiling a bunch of dudes. So we have 4 Opt, 4 Path to Exile, 2 Search for Azcanta, and a single Hieroglyphic Illuminations. That card, I was kind of hesitant on playing it first, but turns out an extra cantrip is pretty good, and occasionally when you do get to cast it to draw 2 cards, it just goes the distance. I have been very, very happy with how well that singleton fun of has been doing in the deck. Next up, all of our counter magic, 2 negate, 2 logic knot, a spell snare, and 4 cryptic commands. Cryptic command, obviously super important in a bunch of matchups. It acts as counter magic, it acts as card draw, it lets you bounce your own Snapcasters to recast them, bounce something of your opponent's to counter it later, and it can act as pseudo mass removal, or at least kind of a fog effect to buy you a turn. The 2 negates main board were a bit of a concern from myself and some other players locally, but I've been finding that it does a lot of work. There aren't that many decks in standard right now, or in modern right now, that it's dead against. Spirits and humans are about the only ones where it's bad, and it's one of those cards that if you have it in your sideboard, you're going to be bringing it in almost every single game, so why not just run a couple anyway? Next up, mass removal in its purest form, a couple of detention spheres, 3 terminus, and 1 settle the wreckage. With all of the graveyard decks that have been running around lately, settle the wreckage and terminus do a fantastic job at keeping those at bay. Detention sphere, I was running 1 in the main and then 1 in the side. Determined that having 2 of them in the main is just better because most decks can't interact with enchantments in game 1, or at least they have a very, very hard time of doing so. 3 terminus and 1 settle, some lists run 4 terminus, some are 3 and 1 supreme verdict instead of settle the wreckage. I prefer settle. I think that it just gets around so many more problematic strategies. It crushes the graveyard decks, it crushes Infect, it crushes Jund when you see it from time to time. It becomes almost impossible for the artifact-based decks, whether that's regular affinity or hardened scales affinity, to interact with. I mean, once you resolve one of these, your opponent is going to have a really hard time moving forward with their game plan, reestablishing a board through whatever other disruption you still have left, and it's incredibly hard to play around. The times when your opponent does play around it, you're giving yourself an extra turn or two to find a Snapcaster Mage to recast it, dig for a terminus, dig for another answer, play your cryptic commands. I think it really is one of the most underplayed cards in Modern right now. 4 Snapcaster Mages, I don't need to say anything about that. You guys know what the deal is. After Snapcaster, we have 2 Jace and 2 Teferi. These numbers are a bit iffy for most people. I am set on them. I find that most matches, you either want to be hitting these Planeswalkers exactly on curve, which is nice when it happens, but more likely than that is you're going to want to wait until after you've cleared up the board or after you have enough mana to protect them the turn after you cast them. So only playing a couple of each has been working out really, really well, as opposed to just jamming a bunch of Planeswalkers in the deck so that you can maximize your chances of hitting them on curve. Secure the Waste. This is So good in Modern, guys. I just leagues beyond Entreat the Angels. The cheaper cost, even though you're getting smaller tokens, it doesn't matter. It's easier to Snapcaster back. You can cast it for more. I mean, assume you're going to Miracle and Entreat the Angels for 3. Okay, so instead we're making 4 1/1s. Now that's a huge dip in the power, toughness, and evasion factor, but you're never casting this thing for 4. Uh, in this blue-white shell, you're usually casting this thing for 6 or 7, and if you Snapcaster it back for another 4 or 5, you're just winning that game. I have, in a few instances, fired this off fairly cheaply, maybe getting 2 or 3 tokens just to serve as chump blockers until I can find one of my board wipes. And then 10, 12 turns later, when the game is super deep, when my opponent is about out of resources and I've got things locked up, well, then I can flash this back for 8 or 9, and the game is over in 1 or 2 turns. The mana base is pretty simple. 2 hallowed fountains, 4 flooded strands, nothing special there. 4 field of ruin, 2 glacial fortress. I'm not playing any ghost quarters in this list. I feel like Tron has kind of taken a backseat to other strategies. Field of Ruin does a great job of handling the mirror match, blowing up opposing celestial colonnades, and it's fine against Tron. I'm not worried so much about that deck right now. I am worried about being able to cast my own spells on curve, and having 5 or 6 pieces of land removal just seemed kind of counterintuitive. 3 plains and 6 islands, so a whole bunch of basics. You're never going to run out of them. And 1 fairy conclave on top of 3 celestial colonnades. This is definitely a deviation from most Azorius Control decks that play the full set of colonnades. I'm not doing that. I feel like 1 fairy conclave is in a really good spot just because it's so much cheaper to activate. It's still evasive. It can trade for early aggressive creatures if it has to, or if your opponent plays a Pithing Needle or Sorcerer's Spyglass and they haven't seen the Fairy Conclave yet, this thing just completely blows them out of the water when they name Colonnade instead. The sideboard, bunch of counter magic, as it should be, very specific spots for these. Jace's Defeat, Disdainful Stroke, Rejection, and Dispel all do what they do about the best as they can. Dispel comes in against almost everything. Rejection comes in against so many popular decks right now. All of the affinity lists, any fringe Eldrazi stuff that comes up. KCI, Lantern Control. Jace's Defeat, I'm very happy having one of for the mirror. It's also good against spirits, which I've been seeing a bit more of lately. Disdainful Stroke comes in against Tron, comes in against some of the fringe decks. It also comes in against the mirror because they are also trying to kick off these giant planeswalkers, these massive cryptic commands. Being able to just nip that in the bud when they don't see it coming is very, very helpful. Next up, a bunch of disruption. Surgical Extraction, Tormod's Crypt, and Rest in Peace all deal with graveyards. I'm only running the 1 Rest in Peace because I don't want to affect my own graveyard if I don't have to. Tormod's Crypt helps so much with that. A single Sorcerer's Spyglass, honestly, I'm usually just naming KCI with this. It's very rare that I bring it in other matchups. Those that I do, it's usually some sort of BGX deck where I'm naming either a Liliana or another Planeswalker, or maybe even the Scavenging Ooze if they're being incredibly aggressive. Some more kind of mass removal effects. A Supreme Verdict in the board. This almost only comes in against the Death Shadow decks, the 4-color Shadow that's been gaining popularity. They do run some counter magic. So we have this hanging out on the board. Settle the Wreckage is here for the more aggressive strategies, things like Dredge, things like Humans, or Spirits, even though it's worse there because of Mausoleum Wanderer and Spell Queller. It's also just amazing against Infect in case you run up against that. Hurkyl's Recall and Stony Silence to deal with the artifact decks. Hurkyl's Recall I would probably trade for another Stony Silence if there weren't so many robot strategies running around right now. This does help a great deal against Hardened Scales, especially if they don't see a Ballista. Elspeth as a one-of, she comes in against Humans, Jund, other big creature strategies. Rarely am I going to bring her in against something like Spirits. And depending on the dredge list, she might show up just to help get some chump blockers on the ground. A couple of timely reinforcements, there for burn, there for aggro matchups. Shouldn't have to explain those too much. The next card up has been an absolute all-star for me. I am loving the things that Flash Freeze is doing. It comes in against so many different decks, and it hits so many of their key cards and a lot of their sideboard cards as well. This is another one of those spells that not enough people are playing. I don't know if that's because people don't think of it, they don't know about it, or they just misunderstand the versatility of something like this. But hitting any green or red spell for 2 mana in a format like Modern, that's basically just going to be a counter spell. And that's it. Super short video, super quick walkthrough. Not a whole lot to say other than that. I will be posting another video on Sunday letting everyone know how the tournament went, and I'll try to get a bit of a report in for that. But until next time, I've been Dodge, you've been watching. Have a great day, y'all.